A big break. Republicans breaking with Trump on Epstein. House GOP leaders bracing tonight for a significant number of Republican defections. Republicans going to break from Trump and support a bipartisan bill calling for the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Trump not helping his cause here, ignoring questions today about why his name appears in newly released Jeffrey Epstein emails thousands of times.
Sir, any response to the Epstein emails that mention your name?
Silence. But it was thousands of times his name was included in new emails. And those emails, by the way, are only a fraction of the actual, still unreleased Epstein files, which all leads to the most basic, fundamental question. It is a glaring question. Why is Trump acting like a person desperately trying to hide something?
By July 2025, visible cracks had begun to form inside the Republican Party as several conservative lawmakers openly expressed frustration with Donald Trump over the handling of the Epstein files. Figures such as Representative Thomas Massie and a number of Freedom Caucus members publicly called for the full release of the documents, accusing Trump's Department of Justice of shielding wealthy and powerful individuals. Coming from lawmakers who had consistently defended Trump, the criticism carried unusual weight. Trump had built his political identity on exposing elite corruption, and now some of his strongest allies were arguing that his administration was doing precisely the opposite. The internal conflict escalated on September 10, 2025, when the Senate narrowly voted 51-49 on a Democratic-led effort to force the DOJ to release the Epstein documents. Two Republican senators, Josh Hawley and Rand Paul, broke with their party to support the measure. Their decision was notable given their long-standing alignment with Trump and their reputations as hardline conservatives. Both senators argued that transparency outweighed political loyalty, stating that the American public could be trusted to evaluate the information on its own. Momentum continued to build into November 2025 when the Senate passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act by a wide margin. Despite intense pressure from the White House, a small group of Republicans held firm and helped advance the bill. The outcome marked a rare moment in which Republicans successfully pushed legislation over the objections of a sitting Republican president. Facing the likelihood of a veto override, Trump ultimately signed the bill, signaling how far the political dynamics had shifted within his own party. At the same time, Republican resistance was also emerging on national security and executive power. Several GOP senators voiced concerns about Trump's use of National Guard deployments across state lines. In October 2025, Senator Tom Tillis warned that such actions could establish a precedent that future Democratic presidents might use against Republican-led states. Senator Lisa Murkowski echoed those concerns, arguing that deploying the military for domestic law enforcement, particularly against the wishes of state governors, undermined long-standing constitutional norms. These objections were not framed as partisan attacks, but as warnings about the long-term expansion of presidential power. The Epstein files dispute, combined with concerns over military authority, revealed deeper anxieties among conservatives about the rule of law and executive overreach. The fact that these criticisms came from within Trump's own coalition made them especially significant. The Freedom Caucus breaking ranks was perhaps the most striking development. This group had been among Trump's most loyal defenders during past investigations and impeachment battles. When lawmakers like Thomas Massie accused Trump's DOJ of protecting elites, it underscored a genuine sense of betrayal rather than strategic positioning. Just a few years earlier, such claims from this faction would have been unthinkable. The Epstein files struck directly at the heart of Trump's political brand. He had campaigned as a populist outsider promising to drain the swamp and expose corruption at the highest levels. Delays and redactions surrounding the Epstein documents fueled perceptions among his supporters that he was now protecting the very system he once condemned. Senators Hawley and Paul's decisions to side with Democrats further illustrated this shift. Hawley, known for his populist anti-elite rhetoric, and Paul, a libertarian focused on transparency and limited government, both concluded that public disclosure mattered more than party unity. Their actions reflected a move toward issue-driven decision-making rather than automatic loyalty to the president. Ultimately, The Epstein Files Transparency Act became a symbol of a broader Republican rebellion. It exposed fractures within Trump's base and demonstrated that even some of his most steadfast allies were increasingly uneasy about corruption, executive authority, and accountability. The debate over transparency versus control revealed a party grappling with its principles and a president facing resistance from within his own ranks. The bill ultimately secured enough bipartisan support to override any potential presidential veto, underscoring a clear reality. Trump was unable to carry his party on this issue. A meaningful number of Republicans resisted sustained White House pressure, tipping the balance in favor of passage. The outcome marked not only a legislative defeat for Trump, but also a warning sign that resistance within his party may become more frequent. Phone calls, closed-door meetings, and political pressure failed to stop lawmakers who viewed the Epstein issue as more important than party loyalty. That breakdown suggests growing limits to Trump's influence over Republican lawmakers. Concerns raised by Senator Tom Tillis about National Guard deployments further illustrate this internal unease. His warning focused less on Trump personally and more on the precedent being established. If a president can deploy National Guard troops across state lines against the objections of governors, that authority would not belong solely to Trump. Any future president, Republican or Democrat, could wield the same power. Even conservatives who may tolerate such actions under Trump are increasingly uneasy about how those powers could be used by presidents they fundamentally oppose. Senator Lisa Murkowski's comments reinforced those concerns, emphasizing that domestic law enforcement is not the military's role. Her pushback highlighted traditional conservative principles surrounding states' rights and the separation between civilian governance and military authority. Typically, governors control their state National Guard units, and federal intervention without consent represents a serious expansion of executive power. For a party that has historically championed federalism, Trump's actions invert long-held conservative doctrine by prioritizing federal authority over state control. Reports suggest that at least 8 Republican lawmakers have openly pushed back against Trump, though they likely represent only a fraction of broader dissatisfaction within the party. Public dissent carries political risk, which suggests many more lawmakers may privately share these concerns while choosing silence. Those willing to speak out are creating space for others to follow, and over the past year, signs of resistance have become increasingly visible. At the same time, Trump faces growing risk with his own base. His political movement was built on a promise to expose corruption and confront elite power. The Epstein Files represented a direct test of that promise. When Trump's Department of Justice delayed releases and issued redactions, supporters who expected transparency were left questioning his commitment. Rather than appearing as the outsider challenging the system, Trump risked looking like a defender of it. This perception is particularly damaging because Trump's strength depends heavily on enthusiasm. His supporters are not merely voters, they are the engine of his political momentum. If that enthusiasm weakens, turnout, donations, and grassroots energy decline with it. The danger is not necessarily that his base shifts toward Democrats, but that it disengages altogether. Republican concerns over Trump's use of military forces extend beyond electoral politics. Some senators see uncomfortable parallels in how military power can be used to consolidate authority, even if they stop short of labeling Trump's actions authoritarian. These concerns align with long-standing conservative resistance to federal overreach, especially when it threatens state sovereignty and civilian control of the military. There is also anxiety about politicizing the armed forces. The military is expected to remain neutral, serving the nation rather than any political agenda. Deploying troops into states led by political opponents risks blurring that line and undermining civil-military norms. For Republicans who prioritize constitutional balance and institutional stability, these developments represent more than a disagreement with Trump. They signal deeper concerns about the long-term consequences of executive power unchecked. Together, the Epstein Files controversy and the National Guard debate reveal widening fractures within Trump's coalition. They show a Republican Party increasingly divided between loyalty to a political figure and adherence to long-standing conservative principles surrounding transparency, federalism, and the rule of law. The politicization of military power carries consequences beyond any single presidency, and even senior military leaders are increasingly uneasy about it. Several Republican senators share that concern. There is historical precedent for this resistance. Republicans have long pushed back against executive overreach, including when Trump expanded emergency powers during his first term. They previously criticized presidents such as Barack Obama and Bill Clinton for stretching constitutional limits. Seen in that context, opposition to Trump's National Guard deployments fits squarely within an established conservative tradition, resisting federal overreach regardless of who occupies the White House. Beneath the public dissent lies a deeper undercurrent of quiet dissatisfaction within the Republican Party. Many lawmakers are troubled not only by the National Guard deployments but also by the handling of the Epstein Files. However, most are reluctant to speak openly, choosing private conversations over public confrontation. If the lawmakers who are already resisting continue to normalize dissent, that private discomfort could become far more visible. Political resistance often spreads this way. Once a few voices break the silence, others feel safer joining in. Trump's response to criticism could further accelerate that dynamic. He has a long record of aggressively attacking critics, including members of his own party. If he lashes out at Republican senators who question his actions, he risks transforming quiet unease into open rebellion. While such attacks may intimidate some lawmakers into silence, they could also convince others that Trump is no longer capable of leading the party responsibly. A sustained internal conflict would drain political energy and fracture the party heading into 2026, creating clear strategic advantages for Democrats. Republican criticism carries particular weight precisely because it is not partisan. When Democrats attack Trump, their arguments are often dismissed as politically motivated. But when Republicans raise concerns about corruption, secrecy, and executive overreach, those claims resonate more deeply. The accusations are rooted in traditionally conservative principles: transparency, the rule of law, limits on executive power, and opposition to shielding elites from accountability. These are not liberal talking points, they are foundational conservative values. A small but growing group of Republicans is now invoking those principles to challenge Trump. While they do not yet represent a large faction, their presence is significant. More Republicans are speaking out than at any point in the previous year, signaling a meaningful shift. Importantly, this group has crossed a threshold where it can no longer be dismissed as a handful of isolated dissenters. Multiple senators and House members have now broken ranks on separate issues, making resistance more visible to both the media and their colleagues. Media coverage amplifies this effect. When outlets highlight the 8 Republicans openly pushing back, it legitimizes the resistance and makes it appear viable. Other lawmakers see that dissent does not necessarily lead to political ruin. In some cases, those who speak out continue to thrive politically. This creates a feedback loop. Increased coverage encourages more resistance, which in turn generates more attention. Over time, this dynamic can reshape internal party behavior. As perceptions of Trump's grip on the party begin to shift, behavior across the political landscape adjusts accordingly. Democrats grow more confident in challenging him. Republican lawmakers become more willing to push back, donors reassess their investments, and media scrutiny intensifies. Whether Trump's power is actually weakening or merely appears to be weakening, perception alone can alter political reality. This matters deeply for Trump's political brand. His image as an anti-corruption crusader is central to his appeal. He built his movement on the promise to confront elites and expose corruption. When fellow Republicans accuse him of shielding powerful individuals, particularly through delayed and redacted Epstein files, it directly undermines that identity. The damage to his brand may be more consequential than any single legislative defeat, because that brand is what binds his supporters together. The evidence of internal resistance is well documented. Members of the Freedom Caucus, including Representative Thomas Massie, accused Trump's Department of Justice of protecting the wealthy and powerful. In September, Senators Josh Hawley and Rand Paul sided with Democrats to keep the Epstein Files vote alive. The Epstein Files Transparency Act passed with Republican support despite intense White House pressure and with margins sufficient to override a veto. Senators Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski publicly warned that National Guard deployments set a dangerous precedent and misused military authority. CNN identified at least 8 Republicans openly resisting Trump, with signs that the number is growing. The Freedom Caucus criticism is particularly damaging because it comes from Trump's former strongest defenders. These lawmakers used Trump's own rhetoric against him. He promised to expose elite corruption. Now his DOJ is accused of concealing it. That contradiction strikes at the core of his political identity. Betrayal from allies carries far greater impact than attacks from opponents. Hawley and Paul's defection further demonstrates how powerful the Epstein issue has become. Both are conservative Republicans who concluded that transparency outweighed loyalty. Their actions suggest the issue cuts across ideological factions within the party. Trump's refusal to release the files reinforces perceptions that he is protecting the establishment rather than confronting it. The National Guard controversy reinforces these concerns. Senator Tillis framed his objections not as support for Democrats, but as a warning about future misuse of power. If Trump can deploy troops against governors' wishes, future Democratic presidents could do the same to red states. That argument aligns squarely with conservative fears of unchecked executive authority. Senator Murkowski's warnings about the military's role echo long-standing concerns about civil-military norms. Using military forces for domestic law enforcement, particularly over state objections, runs counter to conservative principles of federalism and limited government. Lawmakers raising these objections are not acting out of disloyalty to Trump. They are prioritizing constitutional norms over personal allegiance. These principle-based critiques are far harder to dismiss than partisan attacks. The growing number of Republicans willing to voice them suggests a meaningful shift within the party. While the movement remains limited in size, its visibility is increasing, and visibility breeds momentum. At the same time, Trump risks alienating his base. His supporters expect him to expose elites, not protect them. The Epstein files represent exactly the kind of corruption they want uncovered. When transparency stalls, suspicion grows. If his supporters conclude that he has abandoned the fight that defined his movement, disengagement becomes a real threat. Republican concern over domestic military deployments reflects broader fears about authoritarian precedents. While senators stop short of labeling Trump authoritarian, they warn that his actions could open the door to future abuses of power. Their focus is not only on the present moment, but on the long-term erosion of constitutional limits. Ultimately, the Epstein Files controversy and the National Guard debate converge on the same question: whether Trump is expanding executive power in ways that undermine the principles he once championed. For a growing number of Republicans, loyalty to those principles now outweighs loyalty to any single leader. Military leaders share these concerns, and a growing number of Republican senators do as well. Their focus extends beyond any single deployment to the broader consequences of repeatedly pulling the military into political disputes. For these lawmakers, protecting the integrity and neutrality of the armed forces matters more than short-term political advantage. Behind the scenes, quiet dissatisfaction is spreading within Republican ranks. Many lawmakers are uneasy but reluctant to speak publicly. However, visible opposition has a way of creating momentum. As resistance becomes more normalized, the political risk of speaking out decreases. If opposing Trump begins to look like a survivable choice, the internal dynamics of the party could shift quickly. Trump's response to this pushback could determine how far it goes. If he lashes out at Republican senators, he risks converting muted frustration into open rebellion. While aggressive attacks may intimidate some critics into silence, they could also persuade others that Trump is no longer a reliable leader for the party. Even if he wins individual confrontations, prolonged infighting would drain political energy and fracture party unity heading into 2026, while simultaneously handing Democrats a powerful political advantage. In that sense, the conflict itself becomes damaging, regardless of who prevails in specific disputes. Bipartisan criticism has given Democrats a new set of tools. When Republicans themselves raise concerns about Trump, those arguments carry far more weight than partisan attacks. Accusations involving corruption, secrecy, and disregard for the rule of law resonate more deeply when they come from within his own party, especially because these principles have long been central to conservative ideology. The Republicans voicing these concerns insist they are not abandoning conservatism but defending it, which adds legitimacy to their resistance. As the 2026 elections approach, this emerging Republican dissent could have serious consequences. If it grows, party unity may weaken at a critical moment. If it fades, Trump could reassert control. Either outcome will shape the identity of the Republican Party and the strategies it adopts going forward. The fact that Republican senators are publicly challenging Trump over executive power and corruption marks one of the most consequential internal tests of his second term. The disputes over the Epstein Files and National Guard deployments represent the first major internal resistance Trump has faced since returning to office. Whether this moment evolves into a broader movement or remains a limited episode will determine how this period is remembered. The resistance is real and growing, but it remains a minority within the party. What happens next, whether more lawmakers speak out, whether dissenters face backlash, and whether these issues continue to resonate, will be decisive. The sequence of events is clear. In July 2025, Freedom Caucus members, including Representative Thomas Massie, broke ranks and accused Trump's Department of Justice of shielding elites, contradicting his campaign promises. On September 10th, Senators Josh Hawley and Rand Paul joined Democrats to keep the Epstein transparency effort alive. In November, the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed overwhelmingly, despite heavy White House pressure, a clear victory for defiant Republicans. Concerns about executive power have extended beyond transparency. Senator Tom Tillis warned that National Guard deployments could set a dangerous precedent, enabling future Democratic presidents to use similar authority against Republican-led states. Senator Lisa Murkowski added that domestic law enforcement is not the military's role, particularly when governors object. CNN has identified at least 8 Republicans openly resisting Trump, with indications that the number is increasing. This resistance strikes directly at Trump's core political brand. He built his movement on exposing elite corruption, not protecting it. Accusations from his own allies that he is shielding powerful figures, especially regarding the Epstein files, pose a greater threat than attacks from political opponents. The decision by figures like Hawley and Paul to break ranks underscores how deeply the issue of transparency cuts across party lines. While the visible resistance remains limited, it points to a broader pool of private discontent. That reality raises the stakes for Trump, particularly with his MAGA base, which expects aggressive action against elites. If supporters begin to see him as part of the system he once condemned, enthusiasm could erode. What happens next will be critical. Trump's response could either contain the dissent or inflame it. His image as an anti-corruption crusader is now under pressure, and accusations from within his own party carry lasting consequences. Whether this moment marks the beginning of a genuine revolt or proves to be a temporary disruption remains uncertain, but it is no longer something that can be ignored.